Hello, everybody. Andy Jacob here with the .com magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Show. And I have a great show today. You know, by watching the show all the time, that one thing that we're very fascinated in and love so much is the sales cycle. You know, when we have an opportunity to bring an expert in sales on the show, we always take that opportunity very quickly because there's so much to learn about rapid growth for your company. And one thing that's very, very interesting, especially for large private equity firms and venture capital firms and the companies that they invest in, is how do you ramp up your business quickly? How do you get your team and your leadership working on all cylinders in the sales cycle? Because we know that if you have a company and you're not selling, you're out of business. And we've been able to bring in one of the real experts, Mr. Greg Woodward, in the sales cycle, in outbound sales, and of course, talking about training programs, customized workshops for different companies. And he's going to bring us inside what he does. But more importantly, you're going to learn a lot today from Greg. If you're a founder, a CEO, or even someone that's not at that level yet in a C-level executive, or you're even someone that's a salesperson, you're going to learn a lot by listening to Greg today. So we're very delighted to have him on the show. Greg, the founder and CEO of Woodward Strategies, welcome to the .com magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight series today.
Happy to be here. Thank you, Andy, for having me.
It's great to have you. You're, of course, a Washington, D.C. sales advisory firm. You help so many companies with their revenue. The case studies that you've provided are absolutely remarkable. People can go on the website and read them. But before we get started, we have so many questions, and we want to give back to the entrepreneurs watching the show using your expertise today. Give us a high level at 30,000 feet about what you do at Woodward Strategies, and then we're going to go.
Okay. So Woodward Strategies started out in 2018 as a sales training company, created a program, and weren't focusing on all salespeople, just the appointment setters. They call them BDRs or SDRs usually. And it grew into a consulting firm since then as well. So 80% of the business is management consulting, and the rest of it is the sales training programs. So basically, the way it works is when a private equity fund does a roll up and they buy 12 companies, they have to integrate them, and a lot of times these are small companies, and they have to integrate them, and they have to make sure that the message market fit it kind of goes across the org, and I help them do that. And then when they bring in the appointment setters to fill the sales pipeline, and then pass those opportunities off to the closers. That's the model. It's a good business, and it's been a very good. I guess you could probably call it the last 15 years, maybe 12, 15 years of tech has really adopted that philosophy for selling, splitting the appointment setters up and then the closers. It's really kind of neat.
It makes sense. Of course, when these firms roll up a number of companies, the companies they roll up, they're doing things differently, and they need someone to come in to sort of provide a customized workshop or a customized training program, so that, let's say, the outbound marketing or sales, I'll call it, accelerates. And you have a 7-week training focused specifically on prospecting. We want to get into that. But before we do, let's get back immediately to the people watching the show. How important is this prospecting and outbound marketing for companies? And why are they failing so much in so many different companies at this particular sort of skill set?
Yeah, and those are good questions. I'll answer it in two different ways. The reason I know how to do this so well is because I was an entrepreneur and I started my own companies before this, and I was the only person there for a while. So I was the sales guy, and I was the person who had to get the meetings with the prospects and try to take something to market that didn't exist. So I got really good at that, and I guess I'm saying that because if you're an entrepreneur, if you're in a very small company and you own the company, or if you're a salesperson that has to build their own pipeline, you need to know how to cold call. You need to know how to approach prospects and get a response with messaging. And you need to know how to do that in a way that doesn't look like everything else. That's the key. If you said, "Hey, Greg, can you distill down, all the psychology just into like one sentence? What is it that makes it really work? Your process works so well." And it's that every single thing that we do is deliberate when we're crafting an approach, and it's intended not to look like everything else. And there's other psychology in it too, but that's really what it comes down to. Why do companies get this wrong? The reason why companies get this wrong, typically when they raise their first, big funding round or institutional funding round, or if they get acquired and it's a roll up, they whenever I go into a company that's not doing well, it's usually because marketing is providing all the messaging for the sellers. Marketing, I'm not dissing marketing. Marketing is extremely important. It's extremely important, right? Without marketing, the engine won't run. But outbound and marketing are two different things. And a lot of times companies just don't understand that. And case in point, just think of it like this. Just think of your email, your cluttered inbox. I'm sure you get a lot of cold emails. If your inbox is cluttered with a bunch of emails, you don't actually have to look at each one. You don't have to examine each one. You just somehow your conscious mind only goes to the ones that are relevant to you from people you know or about something that's relevant to you. And the others you just discard and you don't think about it. It's because your subconscious is doing the work for you, right? So if it looks like marketing, your subconscious is going to discard it because marketing is always there and you're not being approached about anything specific to you. You may have a mental intention of, oh, that's cool. I'll come back to it, but you just don't because life gets in the way and you forget.
Yeah.
So that's the difference.
Yeah, I like it a lot. And of course, when we look at what you do, Greg, and the way in which you explain things, you have something called a sales cadence. And I really like that. It's sort of like an idea that each salesperson or each sales team or each organization or each business has a certain sales cadence that really gets built around sort of a tested messaging. Let's talk about that and how you develop that for a company.
Yeah. So and I'm going to try and put this in the context of value for the listeners. If you have a company or if you're a seller yourself, I'll explain it through that lens. Everybody's heard of your ideal customer profile, right? But you really need to understand when you're creating outbound messaging, you have to tailor that messaging to that persona. And it might be one, two, three different titles, but for instance, one group of personas that would all look at the world the same way would be revenue-minded people in a company versus maybe if the personas are technical-minded, they might be engineers and things like that. You can make the same point, but you have to make it through the lens of how they would explain it in their own head if they clearly understood it. That's how you have to do it. So if you're a CRO, a chief revenue officer, which is my ideal persona, that's who I approach at companies. I've got to put my value story and the reason why you should talk to me through the lens of what you care about. Well, what you care about if you're a CRO is forecasting to a board of directors. In a private equity backed company, that's what they lose sleep over. So I need to put it into the context of we set up an infrastructure that gives you predictable inputs and outputs. So you're able to make forecasting, in the beginning of the quarter and then measure that forecasting as being accurate towards the end of the quarter. Yeah. If I were to approach somebody else in the company that didn't forecast to the board, they'd hear that. They'd think that's great, but it doesn't really move the needle because they don't lose sleep over that.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a great piece of advice for the people watching the show. I mean, rewind what Greg just said, 30, 45 seconds. That's a pure gem. And I would imagine when people contact you or you're on this speaker circuit or you're on daises for conferences, when you think about the biggest mistakes that outbound sales reps make, it sounds like that's one of the things that are one of the biggest mistakes. In other words, they're not putting their mind in the mind of their prospect. Is that sort of the way it works from your perspective?
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's the mistakes are number one, that. Number two, trying to unpack too many things in one interaction, whether it's a cold email or a phone call, a cold call, with the idea that we do so many different things and we don't know what they're interested in. So we're going to let them sift through it all and tell us what they're interested in. Prospects will not do that. And here's why. In the early part of the sales process where prospecting takes place, where cold calling happens, where emails happen, where follow-up calls happen, the prospect doesn't know you yet. So they don't have a perception. So the moment that engagement begins, meaning they open up your email or they pick up the phone, what's happening is different than in a conversation like we're having now from the brain standpoint. The brain is trying to figure out what this is. So it's looking for context and it's spinning around looking for context, anything that makes sense so it can basically tell you how to consciously feel about it. Okay. The biggest mistake that, the second biggest mistake, I think I could say accurately, second biggest mistake these companies are making is when they're cold calling prospects, if they're even doing that, it sounds like a typical sales call, right? So the moment that typical sales call, you arch upward with your cadence, do you have a minute? The prospect is done. They've already consciously made the decision that I'm out of this now because the subconscious said, look, deflect. But trying to unpack too much in one interaction is a problem because you're dealing with that subconscious decision process. You're much more focused on a cold call with how they're going to react versus how they're going to respond. Okay. And the subconscious mind will always take the path of least resistance. There's no exceptions to that at all. So if they don't have a reason, which they don't yet because they don't even know who you are, they don't have a reason to burn mental calories and figure out something, they're not going to do it. So that's why most sales calls that are poorly placed end with either the prospect being rude and hanging up, which isn't too common in B2B, but in any case, they deflect and it doesn't go anywhere. So that's really number two.
Yeah, very interesting. We think about it, and like you said, there are successful B2B companies and there's some companies that aren't so successful. And of course, they reach out to you, even the successful ones, because they want to become even better and dominate the market and take their market share even at a stronger point. And the ones that aren't successful are trying to scrape up and get to the top echelons. When we think about B2B companies and their sales reps, the real successful ones, Greg, what are they doing to attract the market different than the ones that aren't being successful?
Well, with tech companies that have this structure where they have the appointment setters and then they have the closers, what they're doing to attract the market, the ones that I work with, when I get in there, usually they're doing okay. They don't know what okay is or what good or great is. They're doing okay. They've got the team. Some of them are getting meetings. Some of them aren't. But we install a process that is based around core tested messaging. So everything's persona specific. And we do this at scale by saying, okay, well, you have a list of 5,000 prospects at companies that fit this persona bucket. Let's in smaller compartments test these resonance points with them. And we're going to use cold email just to test that because there's less variables to skew the data. And if we do that, we're able to get a read on that message and the resonance point that we're testing inside of 130 people. And usually with 2 or 3 iterations, you're able to get to something where based on data that if you're approached cold and you're this persona, this is the way that you should explain your value in order to get the reaction from them that you want. And then we take that and then we move that over and create call scripts and voicemail scripts. The difference between what I do and what other companies do and other people do is I don't create these long sequences going over 30 days. I create shorter sequences that are very specific. And there's a very specific reason why I'm approaching you, something about you, some observation about you. I see that you just hired SDRs, for example, would be one for my company. And there's a very specific call to action. It's not about everything. It's about one thing. And it's difficult because this is not to digress, but this is funny. Sometimes not so much anymore, but in the beginning of this company, all of my clients were venture backed at that point. They weren't private equity backed. So they were earlier stage. They had just raised their funding round and the CEO was still the founder, that type of thing, typically. And a couple of them, I had some fun. I went to the founder and I said, listen, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to write down as clear as you can what your company does. Okay. And then I'd go to one of the new hires that had just gotten there. And I'd say, I want you to write down as clear as you can what the company does. Which one of those do you think somebody who's approached, caught off guard, would understand? If you know too much about something, which is what happens when you're in a company too long, or if you created the company and you have like a tech person, it's extremely hard to explain it to somebody who's caught off guard. Their brain cannot process multiple things. It has to grab onto one thing that makes sense. You can leave a lot of other things out because that comes later, and that's the discipline that a lot of companies don't have. They don't know how to leave stuff out in the beginning, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of cool.
Yeah, it is cool. And it's interesting because this proven process that you're talking about using, let's say cold calls or email, where you can use data to drive the decisions that then generates quality appointments with decision makers at the types of companies that you want to prospect is really interesting. You mentioned appointment setters, and I guess we're going to call them the closers, right? Is there a different skill set for both of those types of people within a company, or can you take anyone and make them an appointment setter and take anyone and make them a closer, if you will?
Anybody can do appointment setting. Closing's harder, right? So that takes more experience. The companies that I tend to work with, they have dedicated appointment setters. Now, some of them don't. Some of them have full cycle sellers that also are setting appointments. So I've got people in my training programs that are in their 40s and 50s, and most of them are in their 20s and 30s, because the appointment setter role in the sales hierarchy of things is beginning. It's like entry level. Yeah, so it works for both. I mean, the discipline is if you're a full cycle seller, you have to set up and block time to prospect even when things are going well, so you can just never get that dry spot in your sales funnel. Look, the sales pipeline cures all problems for a company, period. And I've got clients. One of them's Wind River Systems. They were my second client in this business. They were owned by TPG, which is a big private equity fund, and it had, at that point, it was like a 40-year-old company, and it had spun out of Intel, I think, and over the decade before. It was flat growth, meaning nothing was happening. It was a $700 million sort of flat growth company. We installed this process and scaled it across the country and then across the world with their teams. And it went from a $700 million flat growth company to a $4.4 billion cash acquisition in 3.5 years with this process. Now, I'm not taking full credit for it, but if you remove this process that we installed, it wouldn't have happened, period. So that is, and there's another client that had a very similar trajectory to that. My first client, called LeanToss. I'm mentioning that not to name drop or anything, but if you set up a process that's repeatable and scalable, what that means is people can leave the company, new people can come in, and it doesn't break the process. Right? Anybody can drive this car is what you want to set up. And that's the mentality, because salespeople move around a lot. The appointment setters don't want to be an appointment setter for more than 2 years usually, because they want to move up and they want to be account executives. Right? So you have to create an environment as a company where you don't have volatility. And that's difficult to do. You know, it's difficult to do because, like, if the chief revenue officer leaves and there's a new one coming in that has a new way of doing things and has their own relationships with vendors and whatever, you just have to insulate yourself from impact of change that's negative. And that's what a predictable and repeatable process will do, whether it's my process or other processes. If you can do that across your company, then you're really able to weather a lot of storms.
Yeah, I love it. You talk about this process. I actually was making some notes, repeatable and scalable. I love that so much. And for the people watching the show, that's what it's all about. You have to have a great process. You have to have methods that are taught by Greg and his team that have really been used to approach and successfully gain access to decision makers at, let's say, Fortune 1000 companies. I mean, that's very impressive, and a long list of other companies across every major industry sector. So the question that I have for you, Greg, is the process that's repeatable and scalable the same to gain access for a Fortune 1000 company as it is for a company that, let's say, is doing 10 million in revenue?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
Pretty much. And the only difference is the approach is tailored to the ideal persona. So at a Fortune 1000 company, if you're trying to get into like the senior tier, your persona has to be the executive assistants. So it's just a different approach. That's the only thing that's different. The psychology is the same. The process and the methods are the same.
Okay, interesting. Let's talk about that, because
Sure.
You talk about, again, I'm making some notes here because I'm learning so much from you. I'm going to use this after the call of my own businesses, but you talk about the ideal persona. And that's really important. So when somebody reaches out to you, Greg, and they've heard about you, they've heard about your success, you have a lot of referral business coming in. What's that first conversation sound like? Do you talk about and try and learn what their ideal persona is first, or do you learn about their sales cycle first? Do you talk about whether they have a process and whether it's repeatable and scalable. What's the first conversation sound like with one of your clients?
Well, I typically I start out by the first thing I ask them is like, well, can you just forward me an email that you would send to somebody or somebody on your team would send to somebody to book a meeting? I start there. And what that tells me is if marketing is creating this messaging and the sellers are not involved in it or not, right? But it gives me an idea of how they're saying it. What's in that email is going to mirror the call script if you're making cold calls. But then I'm gonna ask them, what is your hypothesis about who your ideal persona is? And it would surprise you. Sometimes larger companies, there's a little guesswork there. They don't actually know for sure. And that's okay. So we would test and validate that. You have to test and validate that. I mean, I'll give you just an example so your listeners can, maybe it'll calibrate the way they think about this. So I'll just use my company as a fake example here. So if a company has a sales training program, right, you might say to yourself, well, who would buy that? Okay. You might say, well, a sales manager probably would, or a sales director in a company probably would, or a VP of sales probably would, or a chief revenue officer probably would. Okay. And if I hadn't done this before and I didn't have any data or I had never tested my own niche before, I would probably say that's probably accurate. They're all ideal personas. In reality, and this is a real example, in reality, managers are not my ideal persona because when they're approached, right, the friction that happens in their mind is, should I know how to do this? Is this outsourcing part of my job? Is this, am I willing to stick my head up above the water and wave for the CRO to pay attention to this, and I'm the person that looks bad if it doesn't go well? There's just too much resistance to get them to advance the conversation. So, just by nature of their title, they're not going to do that, right? So companies oftentimes don't understand that. So they need to, like with engineers, like if we have a SaaS product that helps engineering teams develop things without having to write code, okay, you'd think everybody on the engineer team would love that because it makes their life easier, and it does. But the ones that don't love it are the ones that feel like this might actually, nix my job. I mean, I might not be necessary anymore if this tool does it for us. Why would I want to advance that conversation? So that's, we trim it like that in the beginning, and then we just test things. And then when we have some data, then we start to scale and we start to layer on cold calls and voicemails, and we start to layer on a process that I call a cadence that has psychology in it, mini contracts, which is a psychology that makes the parts stick together. This is a nugget for your listeners. Mini contracts, that's a term that I use for what this is, the psychology in the approach. If you're in sales or just business in general, and you approach somebody or you have a meeting with somebody, if you're functioning, you're going to follow up with them. I mean, that's right. You're going to follow up with them. Most salespeople don't take advantage of the fact that they have an opportunity to use what's called a mini contract there. A mini contract is you basically just saying that you're going to do something and then demonstrating follow through on what you said. That sounds pretty basic, doesn't it? But it's shocking how uncommon that is and how noticeable it is to people when they encounter it. Now, later in the sales process where the closing takes place, it's the third meeting and they know you, they know your kids' names, they know where you live. This stuff doesn't work as well because they already have a perception of you. So, everything that's happening isn't holding as much weight in the moment. So if I'm going to approach you and I don't get you, I get your voicemail. That's where I'm going to lay the mini contract. I'm going to put it in the voicemail because it doesn't give you the opportunity to say, oh, no, you don't have to follow up with me. I'll follow up with you. Then I lose control. So in the voicemail, I don't do any selling. I don't ask you to call me back. I leave that window open, but I don't ask you to. I'm not repeating my number. It just goes like this. Andy, my name's Greg Woodward, Woodward Strategies. The reason for my call, I noticed you just hired some BDRs. I wanted to send some information about my company over. I'll go ahead and do that now. I have your email. My info will be in the email. Feel free to let me know. Any case, I'll try you back again around this time on Tuesday. Have a great rest of the day. That's the voicemail. What did I accomplish there? I didn't try and sell. I didn't say, this is going to do this for you. That looks like everything else. What I accomplished there was you heard it as a human being. my voice, and the mini contract. So when I call you on Tuesday, what does everything else sound like? Hi, I'm just checking in. The reason I'm calling Andy is because I said I would. So Andy, you may have seen a note from me last week. I promised I'd try to catch you around now. Look, the reason I'm calling, your
Love it.
perception of me is formed based on that one thing because you don't have anything else to go on.
Love
It holds
that,
a tremendous amount of weight in the beginning of an interaction. So that's like throwing fire on something that's working, or
Love
gasoline
it.
on a fire that's burning.
I love it. The mini contract, entrepreneurs, CEOs, rewind again what Greg just said. I mean, right there, that could be a dynamic change in your entire business model by using what Greg calls the mini contract. I mean, that is a fantastic opportunity for people to take advantage of. It's you say something that you're going to do, and then you do it, and then you gain an advantage because in this world that we live in, so many people don't do what they say they're going to do.
Yeah.
Just by doing an old-fashioned, I'm going to do something and doing it, you gain an advantage and you get inside then in a way that doesn't look pushy, doesn't look salesy. It just looks like you're the kind of person that follows up and delivers on their promise. I mean, it's fantastic. That's great. I already know we're going to book you again. I'm going to book a much longer time with you. I want to get into this much more in depth. I know we've only cut out a certain amount of time. I mean, you're working with so many clients right now. We've only booked you for a half hour. So thank you for coming on the show. And I might indulge myself for a few more minutes than normal, but I want to talk to the entrepreneurs watching the show that maybe are having a tough time. I mean, you've done a great job. You've been at this for almost 2 decades. I know a little bit about the genesis story of how you started and where you've taken it to. It's fantastic. But for the younger entrepreneurs, Greg, watching the show that maybe are having a tough time in their business, or they're freezing in the frame, maybe they don't know what to do, maybe they're thinking about a pivot. Can you share some sort of Greg Woodward attitude about what it takes to be an entrepreneur and keep on pushing when times get tough?
Yeah, I had this conversation yesterday with a sales team. I love this conversation. I'll just tell it to you like I tell it to them. Every entrepreneur has been in a really low place. That's what entrepreneurism is. I mean, especially when you're first starting out and you don't know how to do anything yet. Everything is new to you and you're figuring it out as you go along. You take that and then you add a recession to it, or you add something to it that you can't control, and it gets really bad, right? I'm talking about my personal experience now back in 2008, 2009, 2010. A lot of times when you've got that kind of stress and there's the unknown, you don't know whether or not there's something on the other side of this. You're spending a lot of your time and maybe a lot of your money, and you don't know how it's going to pan out. That's pretty scary, right? The thing that it's so simple. In, I guess it was 2010 or 11 or something like that. I had really stepped in it. I mean, I was a company that was a turnaround. I was the CEO for a little while, and then I wound up buying most of it. And then the recession happened, and it was a luxury apparel company. I didn't even know anything about the apparel industry, and I wasn't really interested. I was interested in flipping it. So all of a sudden, I've got all this debt. They're pulling cars out of my garage. I'm serious. And like that was like the low point, right? Everybody is going to have their own low point. And look, a lot of people have been a lot lower than that, but this is my low point. And I sat there and I was watching all these videos online. A couple of them were like Tony Robbins interviews and things. And I think Tony Robbins is a great human. So when I see an interview, I usually watch it. And I haven't heard him say this anywhere else other than this one interview. Apparently, when he was young, he found this book called the 7-Day Mental Diet, and he said it changed his entire life and put him on the trajectory that is how he got to where he is now. And that's a pretty big drink right there. Like a little book like that changed your life. It was a 19-page book or something. But I was at a point where I had nothing to lose. I mean, I like, it was bad. So because I was at that point where I felt like I had nothing to lose, I gave it a shot. And that was when I was 30, 31, maybe 42 now. Um, within 5 months, like my entire life was different. My income was mid six figures at that point. It's gone up every year since, from zero, from debt. And I'm saying that, and I know that's sort of a personal story, but I'm saying that because if you've got entrepreneurs in your audience listening to this, do that exercise. I'll send you the book. I'll send you a book. I'll send you a copy of it. I send that book to a lot of people. I send it to everybody in my training program gets a copy of it, an e-copy of it. And there's been thousands of people that have gone through the training program. But that is the easiest answer I can give you, because if you do that, it rewires the neural pathways in your brain. And the way that you deal with challenge and negativity, it's not that you ignore it and like you pretend it's not there. You just don't hold on to it the same way. So the feedback loop in your mind isn't spinning around, in a negative way all day long. Because, from a neuroscience standpoint, we know that we're not capable of thinking a negative thought and a positive thought at the same time, right? We would need two brains to do that. So if you're stuck in a feedback loop that's negative, that can go on for years. And you're on pause if you're an entrepreneur and that's happening. So that's if you do that exercise, you will be successful. If you have ambition and you do that exercise, you will be successful, is the short story.
Yeah, I love it, Greg. Of course, people that watch the show, they know that I love Tony as well. I saw him back in 1990, and he had some life-changing advice for me as well, way back in the day when I was a very, very young man. I'm not going to say how old I was, but it was fantastic. And
Yeah.
I love what you're doing, Greg. I mean, this is fantastic. I mean, Woodward Strategies is really changing the dynamic. You had some great nuggets for our viewers. I love the mini contract, and I love thinking about it as a process that's repeatable and scalable. Today we learned about the ideal persona. I mean, I took some notes along the way, so I know when I do an interview, if I'm taking my own notes, it's a great interview. So I'm so happy you had a chance to come on the show today. I'm going to bring you back. I'm going to schedule an hour with you because I want to get deeper into this ideal persona and this
Sure.
repeatable, scalable opportunity that you've spoken about. But for now, again, thank you so much for cutting some time out for us. And I want to thank you, Greg, for coming on the .com Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Show today. This has been amazing.
Awesome. Andy, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.